This is Helena Norberg Hodge. Hi, Ron. Can you, Helena, you can see the scroll, so I'll take your questions. You don't have to worry about it, but it's uh, just so you know, it's at the bottom of your screen. So I asked Helena to come. Helena has done 50 years worth of localization work of what she calls local futures and the emphasis and the interest in what is it to live hyper locally and and divest ourselves from the global monoculture, the maw of Western civilization that has taken over so much, but that is currently falling apart, dissolving as we speak. It cannot be sustained. And so I asked Helena to give us like 5 minutes of her background, just so everybody's caught up. And then I want to talk about the dream moving forward. How do we take what you know about how to live naturally, locally, sanely, um, in connection with the land, with each other, and how do we um, spread that? And how do we also do it linked globally, because we are linked globally. We have this one web, the internet. We have a way to exchange all of this information. How is decentralized, open source, hyper localized meet with the global village that we have? So, if you wouldn't mind giving us some background and
Okay. Yeah,
thanks.
well, my background is that I trained as a linguist because I loved learning languages. I loved trying to understand other worldviews.
Mhm.
And I was fascinated by the differences that I discovered. But then when I was 30, I was living in Paris. I was working as a linguist. I had also studied psychology because I was very interested in that. And I was asked to go out to this unknown part of the world called Ladakh, which is actually West Tibet. It's up on the Tibetan Plateau, up at 12,000 feet, kind of surrounded by the Himalayas. I had never heard of this place. A lot of people, even today, still haven't heard of it, even though it's a part of Tibet that belongs politically to India, and it has since the mid 1800s. And so this area had been sealed off. No one was allowed to go there. And I went out as part of a German film team thinking I'd be there for 6 weeks. But I totally fell in love with these amazing people, very much like the Dalai Lama. I met the Dalai Lama also then. And there was a lightness of being, a joy, a sense of humor, a vitality like I had never seen. And I just fell completely in love. And so when the filming was finished, I stayed on and I helped to write down the spoken Tibetan language, which hadn't been written down before. And I was going to do a PhD on the language. And I ended up a couple of years in seeking out Chomsky at MIT because I was at the University of London and people there weren't very interested in the alive culture that I was aware was now very threatened by being opened up to the Western monoculture, to the commercialization, the adverts, the tourism, and so on. But Chomsky was quite supportive. And so for a while I was with him and I was going to do a PhD with applying his theories to Ladakhi. Anyway, in the end, I left that too because I had become passionate about trying to explain that we were at that point, and I say we, I mean almost the whole world was beginning to move towards a trade regime where governments were signing in black and white clauses where they told corporations, we won't do anything that threatens your profit. If we do, you can take us to court. So we have these tribunals where governments are being taken to court if they try to ban uranium mining. Right now, Greenland's being sued for 12 billion, more than its GDP because of that. So right now, so I started becoming aware of that back in the 70s.
Mhm.
And I started warning about the way that this global empire of corporations and banks were actually beginning to run our governments. And I'm from Sweden originally, and I had not at all been aware what was going on until I had been to Ladakh. And after I'd been out there for a couple of years, and I saw, among other things, I saw butter which had been transported for 2 weeks come into the local market and sell for half the price of local butter. That opened my eyes to what's going on. How is it possible
Yeah.
that something has been transported for so long can be so much cheaper? I go back to Sweden. I find at that time in the 70s that the biggest food corporation in Sweden is actually Philip Morris, because Philip Morris has bought Kraft, and Kraft is in this giant food company. At that time, also, the giant chemical companies were buying up seeds and creating hybrids that meant that farmers had to buy seeds all the time. Later on, this develops into genetically modified seeds, which are even worse, even more dangerous. And all the time I'm trying to warn about this while also promoting what I call the economics of happiness. I wrote a book called Ancient Futures, which came out originally in 89 in Swedish and Danish, and later on was translated, well, the book, and we made a film in 92, Ancient Futures film, which I hope people will look at because my experience was very unusual. I was speaking the language fluently. I was living with these people who were radiantly happy. And I can also tell you, very healthy.
Yeah.
And I saw that this commercial monoculture coming in was not only creating ill health very rapidly, but ill mental health. So in that part of the world, there were about 100,000 people living in about 100 villages and with one major trading town. Depression was something that was just unknown. Mental health problems were just unknown. Suicide was something that might have happened one in a generation. Now it was starting to happen, and now it's more than once a month, and usually a young person. So when I go back to Sweden, not only am I looking at the food economy, but I'm realizing in Sweden at that time, held up as a sort of model of successful industrial development, we had serious problems with alcoholism, depression, and suicide. And now I'm suddenly aware why. I now see this big picture where I see that the mental health and physical health was so deeply connected to having deeper connections to others. And that meant also, especially intergenerational. So the
Yes.
grandparents and the grandchildren connected, and deeper connections to nature. A knowledge that what I do to that stream will affect my health. What happens to those trees affects me. Things were at a scale where people could see that their impact on nature, on the animals, the plants, the water, was an impact on themselves. In addition, they had a Tibetan Buddhist worldview, which I'm now aware helped protect them against the missionaries who had come out for hundreds of years. Christian missionaries had managed to go there, and they had tried to persuade people, as they did with many indigenous cultures,
Oh, there
that
were
their
also.
nature-based spirituality was inferior and that they needed to convert to Christianity. But the Tibetan Buddhism protected them. It incorporated the more feminine, indigenous, nature-based spirituality. And by the way, I mean, there's a lot of shallow anthropological work which claims that Tibetan Buddhism was patriarchal. It wasn't. Those monasteries were inhabited by men who had some nice paintings and some fancy rituals, but they had no real power because the real power was in the localized economies basically to do with farming and dealing with animals, some trade, but essentially a more self-reliant, land-based, nature-based, and people-based culture. So anyway, I read Small is Beautiful, which I also really recommend to people, by a German economist living in England. He had gone to Burma in the 60s. And as a Western economist, he was suddenly completely shocked by the reality that in this traditional Buddhist culture, there was no poverty. So he had to rethink his theories, and he came up with this very strong message. We need more holistic thinking and we need decentralization. So that is exactly what I had found. I was supported by that book. I started projects in Ladakh, later on in Bhutan and other places, and involved with decentralized renewable energy. And we show that you could, if you want to have greater comfort than a traditional culture, you could have it without destroying the earth, without taking over power.
It's all free. Yes.
So anyway, so for 50 years, I have been going back and forth between this non-Western world and the West. And now we built up what we're calling a worldwide localization movement. And for us, localization is essentially a process of reconnection, having been disconnected from the beginnings of the modern, essentially, economy. It was a techno-economic system with enclosures in Europe and slavery elsewhere. We were driven away from the land, from the real economy, from diversified, decentralized production, and from interdependence. And as we were driven into these cities where we had no control over our lives, we ended up fighting one another to try to get a few jobs that were created from the top. So it's fairly simple. We so badly need decentralization, recovering our interdependence with one another and with nature. And then it's amazing what we can do. So that's already happening. So we see a worldwide movement, which includes things like everything from Steiner schools to a transition town movement to permaculture to eco-village movement, eco-university movement, and very importantly, a worldwide local food movement where people are realizing, as they did, particularly in COVID, that we need to have food closer to home. We want fresh food. We want organic food. And in order to have that without any need for chemicals, we need diversity on the land. It's monoculture, which never produced more food per acre of land, never. But we've been lied to by people who believe what they say. The problem is now we have a lot of beautiful language from the UN, from the governments around the world, from particularly the corporate think tanks. And they're using all the language of decentralization, indigenous people, women, biodiversity. But actually, if you follow the money, it's going towards supporting bigger and bigger techno-economic development and now replacing people with robots, where absolutely it's the last thing we need. Because actually, if we could liberate the human movement, humanity from this yoke of ideas, it's amazing what we can do. So in the localization movement, we started something called a World Localization Day on June 21st, celebrating all, as many of the initiatives around the world as we can. It's limited how much we can do as a small organization, but it's wonderful to see on every continent, to see how when people come together, which is not easy, we could talk a lot about that. How do we come together more effectively?
Yes.
But when people do, and when they come together, particularly over land and seed and water, in 3, 4, 5 years, barren land can be a flourished land, productive garden, far more productive than any monoculture. So please, please look at this and don't fall for the language of regenerative agriculture. It's been brought in by Kellogg's and Nestle to undermine to undermine the importance of shorter distances between the farm and the city, between the producers and the consumer. Let's not obfuscate that and talk about regenerative, which now includes what Kellogg's and Nestle are doing, big monocultures using glyphosate, that they talk about treating the soil well. Well, they cannot with the glyphosate. So shorter distances, diversification, we can call it regenerative too, but please pay attention to the need for local. And yes, we need to communicate more. So this is what we do in Local Futures. We have been holding international conferences for about 20, well, we started in the 80s, but international conferences where we can come together, where we can share our stories, where we can see that we're part of a global movement that is so much bigger than we realize.
Yes.
I would say one more thing also, Meg. You were saying how the dominant system is falling apart. It isn't yet. And I worry that our assumption that this system is falling apart works against us. We should be warning people about the fact that it's still alive. Our governments are still supporting it. And I think we need to be aware that there are a lot of well-intentioned people, whether voters or government leaders or corporates, who believe that in order to feed the world, we've got to have we've got to have the supermarket, who believe that we have to have more technology to feed us. They actually believe the propaganda they're putting out. And it's
To sell.
now about raising awareness, which is why I'm really grateful for your Substack.
Yeah.
And we need to just do everything we can to get a clearer, more holistic, honest look at what's going on around the world. We have a choice now. Do we move away from nature to fight over minerals on Mars and in the deep seabed, which is essentially what the war machine is pushing? And we're basically either choosing a war machine because it's a war against others, it's a war against life, or we're choosing a path bringing us home to nature, to community, to connection, to how we evolved. It's about becoming more fully human. More fully human, what I discovered in Ladakh and later on in Bhutan and working with people from Vietnam and Myanmar and so, is that to be fully human, we also need to develop a range of skills. We need to be more diversified, not one thing. I'm a nurse, I'm an accountant. No, we can actually count some numbers and grow some food and play some music and do crafts. And we can develop multiple skills and feel more fully human. And we develop both sides of our brain, partly by operating with, head, heart, and hands. So it's not so much about having infinite energy and more technology. It's actually about being allowed to be more creative. And it's happening in the eco-village movement, in the permaculture movement. When we look closer to the ground, there we actually can see the amazing results, both human healing, people suffering from depression, from addiction, people suffering from just, plain depression, restored, vital and happy at the same time as the land, the water, the living world on which we depend is here. So that's a great long monologue.
That's beautiful.
It's been a 50 years experience.
Yes. Yes. Beautiful, beautiful. Everything you said, yes, yes, yes. It reminds me of the post that got me a lot of followers here on Substack, which was not intention, but I put that I was a clinical psychologist for 17 years, and the thing the hill I'll die on is that there are no mental disorders.
Mm.
There's only the system that's disordered. And it's simply unnatural. It's like living inside of a machine instead of organically, which is built in. We naturally, every child, every animal will play with their hands and their left brain, and every child is a creative genius and a polymath and all of it.
Yeah.
But they get plugged into the system so early. And then wherever that system gets plugged in, we have the same disorders.
Mm.
So it tells you it has nothing to do with us. It's nothing chemical. It's
Yeah.
nothing built in. It's not in
Yeah.
our blood. None of this is
But you
real.
know, one of the things I found both in mental health and physical health, there are so few studies that try to study health, what it
Oh,
means to be
that's
mentally
why I
healthy.
left clinical
What it,
psychology. Yes.
yeah.
Nobody knows
And
anything about it. Yep.
yeah.
Yeah.
But how did you find out that, exactly this, that where the system has entered, you get more mental health problem? Where
Yes.
did you even find that? Because you won't find it in academia. You
No.
must have had to go outside.
Yes.
We have to
Yeah.
actively
Everything I
look
learned was
for
outside of the system. Yeah.
yeah. We have
Yeah.
to actively look for the information.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
and
And we have
there's
to remember it. Like it's really a
yes,
remembrance. It's a remembrance of what is natural, what's built in.
yes.
It's nothing we even need to study.
No, well, in the sense that the evidence, what I'm finding, what works against us so much is that because people aren't helped to see that bigger picture, they
Mhm.
end up blaming their own culture, their own government, themselves,
Yes.
rather than the system. And
Yeah.
of course, we're not just saying, oh, just blame the system. We're saying, don't support the system,
And take
liberate the system.
responsibility.
Yeah,
Yes.
out of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And it's nice to have scientific studies that affirm what we know intuitively because
Yeah.
it's a way to communicate. But it's like all of psychology, all of these fields, that word came from slavery. We're working in a field. It's basically just an enormous prison camp that everyone is in, and then the Europeans, us white folks were the first colonized, the first enslaved, and then we were sold whiteness as white supremacy, and manifest destiny and Christianity as a way to keep us, better slaves, and to keep our foot on someone else's neck. So and I see it all as completely innocent. Does all go back to psychology. It goes back to a story of division, a story of an external authority, a god or a government or a corporation that knows better than I do
Yeah.
how I want to live. And that was always a lie. And so, yes, and I left psychology and I was always searching for truth. And it was like, well, what's the most fundamental truth? Oh, we're God.
Yeah.
We are source. It is oneness. And this is a very direct, realizable thing. And the cosmologies of our indigenous ancestry, they all knew it. It
Yeah.
was animism.
And I just learned recently, I didn't even know this, that the first book off the printing press was about the evil witches and the need to burn them. And so, again, when we look at how Christianity ended up burning women at the stake, I've recently changed the language a bit because I realized that what I was witnessing in Ladakh and Bhutan and other countries was that the entire culture was being pushed into an infantile masculinity. What I
Mm,
write about in my book, Ancient Futures, I call it a teenage boy culture. And so recently, with some of my female colleagues from around the world, including a neuroscientist from Sweden you should know about,
mm,
she's still in psychiatry. She's still keeping a foot in the university world, but very much saying exactly the same thing. It's the system that's creating the mental illness, not your fault. But anyway, I organized a program I called Feminine Futures, which we taught at Schumacher College, and we also have online. And so what we're basically saying is men and women need to reclaim their feminine side, their nurturing, their loving side, and it's incredibly helpful to see it that way because,
yeah,
as we know, so many of the women who've risen to the top have become hyper masculine And so I really hope that we can get that word out and support this path towards more heartfelt and it ultimately means local face to face
Yeah.
care and concern. It's nurturing care and love.
Care and
It's
love.
again the choice between a path of fear and
Yeah.
war versus love and care and connection. And it's once you step back and look at that big picture, it becomes so clear. And as you were saying, we don't need science to tell us this, but I do feel that people need the information that you and I are sharing. We
Yes.
need to get it out more widely. So many people are
Mhm.
so lost, and continually they end up blaming themselves. And, right now, the whole climate narrative, it's all about how you greedy human being, you didn't listen and you're still driving your car. And in the meanwhile, the import and export of the same food products, of water, of milk, the emissions from global trade, completely unnecessary trade,
Absolutely.
are the main cause of climate change.
Mhm.
And of course, climate change is caused by monoculture, by the pesticide, by the deforestation. And this carbon narrative is what we call carbon colonialism. And
Yes.
so, as part of my Feminine Futures series, we were also talking to my close friend and colleague, Camila Moreno from Brazil. She's been at all the COPs and she's seen that it's basically corporate heads sitting there telling governments how to frame this, telling them that they need to have permission to trade in carbon, while the
Yes.
rest of us are told that we should never get in an airplane, which, by the way, is also a real problem because a lot of the caring people feel they shouldn't travel. And so
Mhm.
there's less deep communication. We
Mhm.
need real cultural exchange, communication, and a deeper sharing between so-called rich countries and so-called poor countries.
Yeah, love that, so-called, exactly. This is
Yeah,
really the, interest I have in what we're doing here on Substack, is I keep I'm like, I'm seeing the whole internet changed, right? I had, Jeremy Hellman, who works with Seed Hypermedia. These are these guys who are, like, wanting to create Ted Nelson's vision, who is the guy who designed the internet as Xanadu, basically, like a decentralized peer-to-peer network,
yeah,
where it's built to not be extractive, and that the algorithm isn't in service to the machine; it's in service to every person, right? So, and we have all the designs. We have the designs for free energy. We have the designs for earth building that is like no cost. I had John Jundai from Thailand on, who you might know. Just his incredible community, right? It's not that we don't have the information. We just don't have the meeting spot. We don't have the gathering spot, which we need. And because there's an incentive to keep us separated and selling all of this back to each other, right? Making it complicated, creating middleman for every human exchange.
yeah,
But my view and what I'm experiencing is that sometimes call it like the signal versus the noise. The signal is getting so loud, like you're
yeah,
describing. There's so many people,
yes,
and then we're waking up from like the story of, like, let's talk about the 5 genocides happening. We're waking up from the story that, like, Israel, which will wake us up from the story of America, which will wake us up from the story of country,
yeah, yeah,
right? It's like
exactly.
they're all falling apart because
Yeah,
there is no such thing. It's just going back to psychology, it's just an idea. It's just an
yeah,
idea that there's a division here,
yeah, yeah.
right?
Well,
And there's ownership even. Yeah.
yeah. But I do want to say where we had to look more deeply is at the fact that when we humans were deeply embedded with nature, in nature, we evolved into different races, different cultures, different languages. So we had incredible diversity, even within, which is also in these traditional cultures, even within a few miles, there would be a difference. So, for instance, in the mud architecture, in one area they needed to put
Yeah.
some straw in another area it wasn't needed. There were different dialects. There were even animals that were so adapted that when, a farmer had lost his donkeys to wolves, and I said, "Oh, but I know that in the village only 2 miles away, this farmer just has a lot of young donkeys. Maybe I can help get some." Because a lot of our work has been about supporting small farmers and local food production. He said, "No, no, no. They're near the river and the ground is soft, so their hooves are too soft. We need to have donkeys from this more mountainous area, only 2 miles away, because the hooves are much tougher when they're born." So you see, the diversity was
Absolutely.
incredible, but
Mhm.
the communication was so lived, it was so whole, it was so
Yes.
embodied that it was
Yes.
deeper and much greater understanding. And because people were secure, they didn't fear difference. And this is what I experienced in Ladakh in the early days, just this amazing openness to difference. And then I saw, as people are shrunken into these little servants in the urban consumer culture, how fearful they become, how intolerant of difference.
Yes.
Diversity becomes then a source of fear and difference.
Yes.
Whereas the diversity, when all of us are allowed to be free. Another thing I want to say about that is I realized how when children grow up in a broader community, so every mother has about 5 to 10 caretakers for every child. So every child is known by about 5 to 10 people who see that child exactly the way they are and accept them the way they are. There's
Yes.
no pressure. By the
No.
age
No
of one,
agenda.
walking, or I'm going to be scared. I've got to be speaking by this age, otherwise I'm going to be worried. No, a relaxed acceptance of exactly who you are. So what I found was that in that indigenous, deep diversity, deep ecology, holistic ways of being, you had greater individualism. So
Yes.
it's so paradoxical to get this thing in America about individualism when people are so scared. And now with the political correctness and the language about, male and female, and are you this, and are you indigenous? Do you have X amount of blood? And, it's just a,
Yeah.
a fear-based and warlike machinery. But
Yeah.
when people decide, which is what we encourage, to connect with a few like-minded people where they live, even in the biggest city, it can be in, Nairobi, it can be in New York, it
Mhm.
can be, in Mexico City, coming together to form a bit of a group, change the I to a we,
Mhm.
explore deep sharing conversation where you can express your fear, you can express your loves, but your deeper self.
Mhm.
Once you can relax and feel accepted the way you are,
Yes.
that's when people become brave, courageous, and able as a we to
Yeah.
start making changes. So that's a message we need to put out on the screen, but it is
Mhm.
about face-to-face communication wherever possible.
Yes. 100%. I totally agree. And I quite like live streams and podcasts and things so that we get back to the oral tradition. We get back
Yes,
to direct,
yes,
right? We don't have to like write it all down and then read it and
exactly.
move it through,
Yeah,
right? We can feel each other. There's so much more
yes,
information. Yeah.
absolutely. And back in the 70s, that was the beginning of real research that looks at the difference between men and women. And there were many things that were really interesting there. And one of them was that women tend to resist writing more than men do. And women globally start speaking earlier than boys do. They're very fluent, very adept at oral communication. But again, what I experienced in the traditional was when you had more decentralized structures, women with their oral capacities and their leadership was so much stronger.
Oh,
And so again, and one of the many, many reasons for decentralization.
yes. Yes. Absolutely. Yes. And, you know, my experience has been 30 years working in healing and learning what it is to take someone's conditioning off their system. Each one We are each so unique. We are each, like I said, creative geniuses. We each move toward fulfillment naturally. And what we when we get the monoculture out of our system, we may be quite surprised by where we want to be. And we might notice that there's multiple places in the world that we want to live or travel to, that we are large, we contain multitudes. And we have not unlocked, what, 10% of our brain or whatever it is, right? And I would say our whole soul. Like, we've literally been treated for thousands of years as slaves. Um, so we don't even know what's possible. So I'm in the business of, like, let's 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 start scratch. Let's imagine like we're babies. What would you do? What would as Byron Katie, a spiritual teacher, says, who would you be without your story? Right? If you had no idea of your limitations, that you needed money, because that's what it all goes back to, right? People won't create decentralized local cultures because they believe they need money to survive. But as John was talking about, as we all know, we don't need money to survive. Money is it's literally paper. It's literally a number on a screen. Um, and forget surviving, we're talking about thriving, right? So, um, so because I know, because I watched it person after person, and in myself and everyone I know, we move toward fulfillment. We also are highly productive. We do a lot. We create a lot, and it's biomimicry. Because we're nature, we create abundance. So I know that a sharing economy, gift economy, is what we would create were we to not be afraid. And I imagine you've witnessed that over and over again, the abundance that happens in a local.
I mean, again, I witnessed it in the traditional setting.
Yeah.
What I've witnessed in the West is that people have tried to set up the gift economy. They've also tried to set up a local economy with a local currency, that they
Mhm.
create. And I have to say, until now, they're not working. And that's why I would really hope people would listen to this right now, while we still have a national currency, which is going to be changing with a shift to digital currency, which is terrible. But if we could understand that we can set up local systems using the national currency, but in order to do it, we do need to build enough awareness to get enough of a group, to support that farmer or that builder or that craftsperson or even that general store, which might be in our small village and it's about to go under because, the Walmart in another town is destroying the small. So if we come together right now using the regular currency, we can start creating an interdependence, which in another year or two could translate either into a gift economy or into a real local currency. But
Mhm.
for right now, I would say don't become too idealistic and don't wait. You can create the structures of closer interdependence, particularly I would say there is nothing as important as food. The reason the food is the most important is, just look at Fukushima or the floods and the crises around the world, COVID, and you'll see that when the infrastructure breaks down for some reason or other, food is the one thing that becomes absolutely essential because we've had these policies where governments are separating us more and more, imposing monoculture. So in your area, you might only have sugarcane or petrol or, soybeans and nothing else. So diversify and support local farms as much as you can because even buildings, people can gather in schools and churches or each other's homes. But if there's no food in the area, you're really in trouble. So it's a foundation. Also, I wish we could get people to look more at our research on how the global food economy is the biggest contributor to everything from serious heart disease, cancer, whether it's the junk food, whether it's the pesticides, which are linked not only to cancer, but to Parkinson's, to virtually all neurological diseases. So the pesticides and now more and more genetically modified stuff, it's
All the
absolutely,
pharmaceuticals in the water, everything.
yeah, it's all part of the global food economy.
Mhm.
So shifting that economy towards more decentralized is one of the most important. And like I say, you can start right now using the regular currency. If you try to do it as a gift economy, you won't be able to involve as many people as you need. And in another year or two, that may change. It's likely to change. But
Mhm.
for right now, use the regular currency and just put a lot of effort into what you're doing with your Substack, raising awareness to
Mhm.
get more people in a particular area aware how they've just got to go to create these alternative, people based, community based systems because our governments are simply blindly in the grip of a monstrous machine, of the
It's a
machine.
monster. It's really one government. It
Yeah,
is not. It's the illusion of governments in the same way that it's like an
exactly.
illusion of multiple corporations, but it's really one
Yeah,
holding company. It's the same guys.
absolutely.
Yeah, yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. And so it's not. I mean, yes, yes. We got to go global. We got to go local, and we got to do our sharing economies.
Yeah.
I
Oh, can I say one
Yeah,
more thing?
yeah, sure, sure.
Paradoxically, so many of our tribe are people who have traveled, are people who are highly globalized, like I am. I'm from birth globalized, Swedish, English, German, lived in America. And interestingly enough, it's often people who've had more experience of different cultures who see the pattern of the monoculture and the need to create the local. But remember, creating thriving, diversified, feminine, organic local communities and economy, it's not a prison. But if you and I moved from Byron Bay to Portland, Oregon, there are already hubs around the world that demonstrate the benefits of the more spiritually based, holistic, feminine.
Sure. The results are in.
Sorry.
Yeah. The results are in.
Yes, the
Yep.
results are in, and
Yeah.
and you can, of course, enrich your lives and your lives of your children of being able to live in different economies, different culture. But you want them to be connected, to be thriving, to be non polluting. And so, and you do want a certain stability for your child, especially growing up in early years. If you move too often and you disrupt
Mhm.
ongoing relationships, that's a danger for young children. But staying rooted and even being in different parts of the world and different parts of the year, as long as you're coming into community-based, healthy systems, that's also fine. And paradoxically, we feel that one of the most important things right now is that Westerners be willing to go to experience more nature based, so called poor communities to understand the reality of what's going on. And we need that very badly from the so called poor countries who are being made to feel stupid and backward, and particularly farmers around the world. In the West, we only have like 1% doing proper farming, and they're being made to feel backward and stupid. They very badly need the support and the relationship with the consumers, with the communities who care about healthy farming.
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah. And in my view, it's like this is why I'm encouraging everybody to create GoFundMe's and share their vision, and that includes folks who in poor communities um who really they just need just like any garden, right? They just need a seed fund to
Yes.
get everything going, right?
Yeah.
And that seed fund, because it's all natural abundance, is
Yeah.
small relative to a billionaire. And
Yeah.
I'm seeing, like, it's, as the jig is up, as people are waking up psychologically, and I'm like, I'm always daring billionaires to work with me
Yeah.
because it's like they're gonna their house of cards is falling.
Yeah.
People are quitting their jobs left and right. Like, no young people are getting married anymore. All the
Yeah.
institutions are failing. Nobody's going to college. Like, the
Yeah.
institutions are done. Um, and so
Just
it's like
about.
I'm always just like, who's gonna call the game? Who's the billionaire who's gonna call the game? Because it's over.
Yeah.
But is really to it's like invest in local that's it. And so it's like, here's where to invest. Here's the vision that you don't have because you've been brainwashed for
Yeah.
however many generations. And some of us have woken up from it, and we'll map it for you. We'll map the path of your soul's redemption and
Exactly.
of getting
But
the
we haven't met earlier, Meg.
I know.
How long have you been doing this?
I've only been doing this podcast a few months since March. I kind
Oh,
of broke out of a cult I realized I was in.
oh,
And
really?
yeah, yeah, because I teach awakening to oneness, in addition to healing.
Yeah,
I'm a meditation guide, and I used to work
yeah,
with a teacher. And so, and then I realized, like, oh, she doesn't actually wish me well, and all these spiritual teachers actually are problematic,
yeah.
because
It's so interesting because so many of them ended up buying into the whole global monoculture, and they just did
yes,
that. It is tricky, this difference between the diversity and the local and the
yep,
ultimate oneness of all life. It is tricky.
yep,
And paradoxically, it's when people are more deeply embedded in community and nature that they feel the oneness and
yeah,
they gain that amazing strength and feeling
yeah,
of how wonderful it is to be a tiny speck in this giant miracle of life. Uh,
precisely.
yeah. So,
Yes. Yeah, this is my experience, where I help people come into the body and then feel
yes,
into the oneness, right? Because the body is not separate from God, it's not separate from
exactly.
oneness.
Yeah. And this is what Christianity pushed on us,
Yes.
that the body is dirty, the earth is dirty. We were
Earth
told
is women are dirty. Women are, but yes.
anti-life. Yeah.
Yes, anti-life. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, yeah, all of religion I got beef with because there's no middleman to God. There's no middleman to your true
Yeah.
nature, to
Yeah.
source, and it's
Yeah.
just one flow. You're a channel of God, you are
Yeah.
a channel of nature, and each one of us are unique and perfect and perfectly complementary. So exactly what you said, it's like, once you're really in your body and out of the spell,
Yeah.
this will move toward fulfillment, and everybody in local and global ecologies will fit right in. Like, we are an incredible tapestry, when we unleash ourselves, when we unlock ourselves.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And ideally, again, I urge people to do it together because we've always
yes,
been a we rather than an I.
always.
And by the way, that's another thing I have to battle in academia all the time, is the belief that indigenous cultures didn't learn to individuate. They literally, they push this consumer culture individualism, and then and we're told that indigenous people didn't individuate. And so what I've always said is that every child that's born from its mother's womb, not for a second does it confuse itself with being one and the same as the mother. So the separation is not something that needs to be taught. What needs to be taught and why we need the spiritual wisdom is the reminder of the oneness of the interdependence, because that's not obvious, because we seem completely separate. You and I from that tree outside, you and I from our mothers, but the wisdom teachings have always been about the oneness and the inextricable oneness of everything that lives. And I have to say, I've become more respectful of Tibetan Buddhism recently when I realized how amazing it was that cultures like the Ladakis and other Tibetan Buddhist cultures were able to survive the onslaught of missionaries that in other parts of the world succeeded in making
Yes.
people feel inferior if they were connected to nature. And the Buddha. I mean, I'm a philosophical Buddhist. I don't have a guru. But as a philosophy, it's also very much, from the Buddha himself, the message, do not take my words,
Absolutely.
as the truth. Test everything with your own experience.
Yes, just
And
pointers.
and the essential message is this inextricable oneness.
That's it. Every single mystic tradition of every single religion found the
Yes,
same thing. Yeah.
yes,
Because it's just true. It can be realized and remembered. It
yeah,
right now, it's this is what
yeah,
I teach, and it's not hard. It's not it's like remembering. I mean, really, it's literally just being aware of awareness itself, remembering who you are,
yeah,
remembering, literally reconnecting to the body,
yeah.
remembering, literally connecting to the land, and then it's like coming back online, and all of the wisdom and codes come back through.
And so tell me again, when did you become aware of that? Only very recently.
No, of my true nature is oneness many years ago. But it's an ongoing process. But I would say where I like fully opened, and I'm like, oh, it's just oneness,
Yes,
and I can look and feel and feel into the ground and feel through my body, um I can feel what that bird is doing. Like that sensing of my larger being. At least 10 years ago now, probably
yeah,
more. Um, and then I would just say that becomes more embodied, and there's an ongoing opening process, um, through just living, just being, just showing up. My friend Oracle calls it, Thalit, comes from the Greek, which means you are a sovereign, you are sovereign being as source. So you're fully your unique self as source. And that's natural. We're naturally elite. Like you said, we're born knowing our uniqueness and individuating naturally. But we never get disconnected. It's only just a story of disconnection,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know? Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, but the story of disconnection also keeps us disconnected and closed down,
Yes.
and it's remarkable, as we know, how much the mind can have an effect on our bodies. And
Yeah.
but that again, I find for me, a lot of the spiritual teachers end up getting confused about the enormous power of the mind on our own body. But then they end up teaching this rubbish that we create our own reality. So I've created that tree out there, I've created the sun and the moon. No, I didn't. You know, this is again the humility and the wisdom of understanding that we're part of a great web and
Part
that
of a
we
great web. And we
can.
are all creators. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
By the way, I was recently asked, I don't know if you know who David Suzuki is, or
I've heard the
there's
name, but I don't know much. Yeah.
there's someone named Sarah Wilson in Australia, and there are a lot of people now who are essentially buying into what they call collapsology, and it's all about how everything is collapsing. And I think it's very counterproductive, because it leaves people, without any of the message that we're bringing about the enormous joy and power that comes from reconnection to life.
Yeah.
So they're not distinguishing
Yeah.
between being plugged into a machine that is anti life versus being plugged into life itself,
Yeah.
including in our own bodies, in their own energy flow of ourselves. But so anyway, so they, like David Suzuki, who is a friend, and on our advisory board is a Canadian, well-known environmentalist, that he's sort of saying it's all over, it's hopeless, you know, forget it. And it's so sad. And he's basing it particularly on this carbon metrics that are telling us that, we are heading towards absolute disaster. They think they can make a model of this entire complex Mother Gaia, and that they can know with certitude what happens, when the temperature here goes up. We are in trouble for sure. We should stop poisoning the planet, poisoning ourselves immediately.
Yeah.
But the idea that some graphs brought out again by a corporate system are
Yes.
telling we've gone beyond any hope. Just stop even thinking that you can contribute to a healthy world. In the meanwhile, when I look at these smaller examples all around the world and the healing that's happening right
Yes.
as we speak,
Yes.
criminal to really tragic.
Total.
People that is hopeless,
I agree. I agree. It's a similar kind of thing in the world of like, there's a lot of shadowy forces, let's say. And when you can get deep down that rabbit hole, and in the end it's like, so what? They got nothing on nature. They got nothing on life. They got
Yeah.
nothing on human beings and
Yeah.
who we really are and on the power of us. And like in my view, like it's already like I get it. Like it's not that it's like the word collapse is not a good word, but the system. My friend Candace DeMeza, who teaches from the Dagra tradition, the cosmology in Burkina Faso,
Yeah.
the people there, and really just talking as a Black woman who, all of her people have been explicitly enslaved and harmed. That it's been so they've been awake to the reality of the system. That it's been falling apart since it was created. Like,
Yeah.
it's never been a sustainable system
Yeah.
because it doesn't
Yeah.
align with life.
Yeah.
So we give it way too much power. And
Absolutely.
this whole story of, like, it's gonna
Absolutely.
collapse, like, as if
Yeah.
it ever sustained us,
No, I
you know?
know. It's just people get so confused. They're confusing a man-made top-down system that
Yeah.
never provided life.
Never provided. It
It
never gave us
created
anything.
fake promises and
Yeah,
created competition for scarce jobs, pushed us into a city environment where we had no access to the real economy. So, yeah, absolutely. And we still give it too much power. But also, I think to say that that system is crumbling, it's not quite true. It is creating a breakdown, so governments everywhere are being rejected. I think we need to be really clear about the need to warn people about supporting new legislation towards digital currency and the digital ID. It's completely top
yeah,
down.
no
It's
digital ID.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Now digital currency, we already have digital currency, it's all just made up, anyway.
yeah.
There's, I had this idea while I was on a live stream. I was like, because it's like, I don't like the word economy. It's really just sharing.
No,
It's
I
just going
agree.
back to,
Yeah,
it's like we need a new word. But
yeah.
this phrase came, gift coin.
Yeah.
But
I
yeah,
also, because for me, it's so difficult because I talk about the economics of happiness.
yeah,
And what I'm aware of is that the destruction comes from an economy.
yeah,
It comes from the right for essentially global banks to indebt our governments, have
yep,
no accountability, to
yep,
create money out of thin air so that there are trillions available for the war machine. That if we want a bit of money to clean up the water or to plant trees, it's not there. So we have to really look at that as an economy. But what we're reclaiming is culture, is life, so that's what we're talking about is how can we come back to
absolutely.
live cultures that allow for that oral communication, that allow for the holistic appreciation of what's going on. And by the way, again, in this Tibetan culture, it is remarkable. They have medical books that go back 1,000 years, and they're aware, they say in there that women are more adept at uh, supporting social cohesion
Yes,
and managing the real economy. And so, at a very fundamental level,
yeah,
this was a culture that raised the status of the feminine. So,
yeah.
anyway, I think I'm
Me
running
too.
out of power. So, we're going to
Oh,
have to.
okay. Well, we'll wrap it up. But
It
it
was
was
great.
beautiful. It was so great to meet you. I was just going to tell you about this gift coin. This is my idea with digital
Yeah.
currency is to change it from Bitcoin to gift coin. So
Yeah.
my friend wrote a whole white paper for us. It's a protocol that's testable. It's ready to be demoed. Like it's ready to go. And it great basically instead of a work ledger where it records the extraction, right? The Bitcoin mining or the extraction
Yeah.
and that the system is. It's all a debt economy, right? It's a gift ledger instead. So it
Uh-huh.
records the gifts. So it mimics nature. It mimics abundance. And so we could, if we flipped, if you use gift coin with any digital currency, you could also just use it. You could use it. You can just use it on your Cash App. We start to seed the gift economy, and instead of it creating a record of debt, it's a record of
Yeah.
gift.
Yeah.
So that's one idea. And then we're back to what you and I totally agree on. Everybody's agreeing on. It's local. It's sharing. It's interdependence. That's our natural state.
It
We can get
needs
back there like that. Yeah.
global communication and collaboration in
Yes.
order to strengthen what is already a huge movement.
Precisely. And we'll, I'm going to link up with all your resources. We're
Yeah,
creating
please.
basically a directory. Yeah.
Yeah. Look at our localization action guide as well. And yeah, let's definitely collaborate. So
Sounds
great
great.
to meet you.
So great to meet you. Very good.
Thank
We've got lots of beautiful comments here. I don't know if you have enough power, but I can take, you got to go. But anyway,
you.
everybody's loved you being here.
How can I see them? How do
Oh,
I
I
get
can
it?
read them for you. Here, if you
Okay.
can hang out, I'll just read it. There's just lovely,
Okay.
lovely comments. I'm gonna go back to the beginning. Ron says every destructive thing has a nice name. Yes, please talk about how we get together in large numbers. Yeah,
Mm,
we're working on this directory. The world needs more polymaths. Yes. Most diagnoses in mental health is stigmatization, precisely. Hi,
mm,
Abby. Hi, Eric. Every problem has already been solved.
mm.
Exactly, exactly. And now, with ChatGPT, with the internet, we've got all the information. We don't need more education, really. We're all here. Ithaca, New York tried to establish their own currency based on units of time. That's interesting. There's been so many things. Can you
Yeah,
speak
I know
more?
there was time dollars. There was a time dollar that survived in Ithaca, New York, because again, I've been involved with this for 50 years. But
Yes.
again, it's died now. So right
Yeah.
now, I want people to come together wherever possible and create the actual
The
connection
real.
that produces
Yes.
consumer.
This guy Fred Williams here on Substack, he talks about the artificial economy and the real economy, and
Yeah,
that the only thing the artificial economy is for is to feed the real economy,
yeah.
which is literal stuff, like literal caretaking. Um, Abby says, "Can you speak more about how we can use our currency to create a sharing economy within the next 2 years?" We
Mm,
covered it. Um, we're working on it. Very interesting idea, using the national currency as part of the transition to the gift
yeah.
economy and
But
encouraging the effort here.
maybe I should just say
Yeah,
again,
go ahead.
that's a really important point. Having, like I say, having worked with time dollars, having started local currencies in Vermont, in California, in England, but they just haven't worked. People are not ready yet. They're too scared to
It's
leave.
too scary.
They
It's
don't-
fair. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I would say we need to be quite clever at trying to do several things at the same time.
Yeah.
So, stay in the dominant system with your, national currency, but also try to build the lifeboats. And right now, to use the national currency to, first of all, raise enough awareness in your community that you need to support your farmers, particularly, and any other businesses that are really essential. But once we really strip things away and look at what's happened with the various crises around the world, food becomes like a
It's
9 out of
number
10
one.
top priority. So there, identify the farmers, support them. There are so many ways of doing it. One of the things can often be in advance, a group of consumers paying for a whole year's harvest. Then, if there is a flood or a drought, the community shares the losses.
Seed
So you
fund.
actually get less than you
Yeah.
thought you could. But what your money is doing is giving him the security to diversify, to buy the healthy seeds.
Yeah.
And in many cases, you have things like as people get organized, they can so reduce the transport miles. Like the farmer might deliver everything at the local school or at a local home, and then other people pick it up from there. And so, farmers markets are a wonderful institution. I helped to start lots around the world. Even in LA, I was there promoting local food before they started new farmers markets in Berkeley as well, all in the United States, in many countries in Europe, in Australia. The farmers market also, if you look at our film, The Economics of Happiness, you'll see us talking there about how remarkably you'll have 10 times more conversations with other people in the farmers market than you do in the supermarket. So it's actually building social cohesion and culture. as
Yeah.
well. It's not just economic transaction. It's
Exactly.
beautiful what can happen there. And if we get more people involved, you can, in many cases, pay as much or a bit less than you would in a supermarket. But in the
Mhm.
beginning, you may have to pay a little bit more, but think of that as an investment in healthy soil, water.
Yeah, so you're seeding
It's your,
this
yeah,
real
it's
economy.
so when you can afford it, do it.
Yeah.
In some of these systems too, some of the people who are better off will pay the bit extra so that poorer people can get the food for less from the local system. In some places, like one of my favorite projects in England, is working with prisoners who are allowed in their last year before they're supposed to be released to come to this project, learn how to grow food. They also do some woodwork and pottery. And it's the most wonderful thing. Their recidivism rate, return to prison, is a fraction of the normal prison rate. And this is the kind of thing that should be happening everywhere,
Of
that
course,
it should
absolutely.
be paying for. But
Yep.
we now have to create that. We
We
have
got to do it. Yeah, the government's never going to do it. It's all going to be us. It was always going to be us.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Anyway, so
Taz,
I
thank you.
love you, Meg.
Thank you.
But
Love to
let's
talk.
create more.
Absolutely. It's wonderful to talk. Thank you so much. And
Yeah.
we'll talk later. Okay. Bye, everybody. See you tomorrow.